Hello, I'm calling this a teachimony instead of just a testimony. I want to be transparent and use my tests to teach others how not to go through the crazy, stupid, shameful, hurtful, self centered, destructive stuff that I went through, I caused, I endured, and I brought on myself throughout the first 4 decades of my life. Therefore, I pray that this destroys some yokes and breaks down some strongholds in your life and gives you insight as to my crazy, confusing, it don't take all of that. What is she over there in that corner doing? Praise that you might see at CKA. I pray that it is therapeutic for some and enlightening for others. I pray that no matter what, it helps someone overcome starting tonight. So, how did we get to Numbers chapter 22, verse 32? What's the backstory? The Israelites are headed to the promised land, the land of Canaan. And on the way, they have destroyed various nations. And the latest nation was the Amorite nation, according to verse 1. That destruction was so devastating that Balak, the king of Moab, got sore afraid and was distressed. That destruction was so devastating that Balak, the king of Moab, became sore afraid and distressed. Now, Moab was a nation that was created by Lot twice over. Moab was both Lot's son and his grandson because of some crazy stuff that happened after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. But that's a story for another day. Balak learns of what happened to the Amorites in verse 4, and he decides that he needs somebody on his side. So he goes and gets the elders from Midian. Now, the elders normally sat at the gates of the city, and Midian is where Moses' wife was from. So Balak convinces Midian in verse 4 that the Israelites are going to lick up all that are round about them as the ox licked up the grass of the field. You know, fear can cause your imagination to run wild. The Israelites haven't even bothered Moab as of yet. In verse 5, Balak decides that even though he now has Midian in his corner, he still needs more reinforcements when it comes to defeating these Israelites. So he sends messengers to a guy named Balaam, who is known to have a connection with God. Because whatever or whoever Balaam blesses is blessed, and whoever Balaam curses is cursed, as recorded in verse 6. Now, here's where I began to intermix my testimonies. Back before 2003, I was known for being able to get a prayer through. So much so that my children and my nephews would tell me they didn't want me praying for them because it was always going to be contrary to what they wanted. Now, that statement was hurtful, but I got it because I used to be their age at one time. And I wasn't trying to hear nobody praying for something opposite of what I really wanted. In verse 7, rewards of divination are taken to Balaam from Balak by the way of the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian. And upon arrival, Balaam tells the elders, just hang loose. Let's hear what God has to say about all of this. And in verse 9, God asks Balaam, what are these men with thee? Now, in case you didn't know, God is omniscient, and that means all-knowing. He didn't ask Balaam that because he suddenly got amnesia or he was a little disoriented. God asked Balaam that so that Balaam could think about what manner of men these were. And in the words of Pastor Johnson just this past Sunday, who sent you? In verse 10, Balaam responds to God and says that they are here on behalf of Balak because of the massive amount of people that have come out of Egypt who destroyed the Amorites. He states Balak wants him to curse them so that he can overcome them and drive them out. Verse 12, and God said unto Balaam, Thou shalt not go with them. Thou shalt not curse the people, for they are blessed. In Pam's terms, God simply says, nope, don't go. During my teenage years, my mother said, no, don't hang out with that guy. I don't like him. Verse 13. And Balaam rose up in the morning and said unto the princes of Balak, get you into your land, for the Lord refuseth to give me leave to go with you. Now, I've got a problem with the way Balaam said this. It's like Pastor Johnson having a leadership meeting and you disagree with something he says. So once you walk out of the meeting, you let folks know that it wasn't your idea. You would have come to a different conclusion, but Pastor Johnson won't let you fill in the blank. How about instead you walk out of that meeting saying, you know what, after careful consideration and some wise counsel, it's best that I don't take you up on your request. Now, I'm only saying this because my response to my mother was rebellion. I thought she was restricting me from a lot of things. I thought she loved my sisters more than she loved me. I thought she had unreasonable expectations of me. I thought I had to work harder than my sisters for the exact same thing. What I thought was restriction was actually protection, because I would later come to find out that my sisters were so much more streetwise than I was. I was a very, very naive, clueless, gullible pushover who just wanted the attention of a male. So because of those thoughts of feeling restricted, unloved, and jealous, I did everything I thought I was bad enough to do once I entered the Marine Corps, because there was no way my mother could restrict me now because she wasn't providing the roof over my head. Wise? No. Probably the most foolish decision I ever made in my life, because it led to shame, confusion, mental issues, hurting of others, plans of committing suicide, domestic abuse in 2 marriages, multiple marriages, an abortion in my teens, guilt, no self-esteem, anger, rage, bitterness. You get the point. In verses 14 through 17, the elders go back to Balak and say, yo, he ain't coming. His God won't let him come. He a wimp. But Balak decides he's going to sweeten the deal by sending more messengers who were a little more crafty than the last set and a little more convincing too. So Balak also sends word that he'll promote Balaam unto very great honor, just as long as Balaam curses these people. Where have we heard that before? Satan is always trying to promote people just to watch them fall. In the wilderness, Satan told Jesus something similar in Luke 4, verses 6 and 7, when he said, all this power will I give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whomever I will, I give it. If thou, therefore, wilt worship me, all shall be thine. Pastor Johnson just asked you on Sunday, who sent you? After having been raped as a teen, I was working at McDonald's with no self-esteem, no direction, no feelings, except that of shame. I worked the drive-thru, and there was this man that came through the drive-thru in his nice car every single day. And one day, he offered me a job that would provide me more pay than McDonald's and nicer clothes. And that's all a girl wanted, because y'all see this picture. I'm homely, right? And I wanted the attention of a man. And I began talking to this guy every time he came through the drive-thru, until one day my boss, Wyman McCary, leaned over and said, if you ever talk to that guy again, I'm going to tell your sister. And he was referring to Tina, yes, this other one in the picture, because she worked there too. Wyman knew I was naive. He knew I had no idea that the guy was a pimp and he was going to use me as one of his girls. Wyman said he would tell my sister so that she could tell my mother. And I began to panic because if my mother knew, where would I live? How would I finish high school? What would my life be like in the future? Thank you, Wyman, for saving me from my naive self. Verse 18. Balaam tells them that regardless of the offer, he cannot go beyond the word of the Lord his God to do more or to do less. That's honorable, ain't it, y'all? God should be proud of him, right? Yeah. Until the next words that come out of his mouth in verse 19 are basically, but hang around for a minute. Just chill here. I'm going to go back to see if I can get God to change his mind. So let me understand this. You are known to be able to bless someone and to be able to curse someone. You are declaring that you can't go because of the word of the Lord your God. And in the same breath, you're saying that you don't agree with this all-knowing, all-seeing, all-perfect answer from God? How is that? Do you trust him or don't you? What's got you double-minded? Is he really God in your life or not? Verse 20. And God came unto Balaam at night and said unto him, if the men come to call thee, rise up and go to them. But yet the word which I shall say unto thee, that shalt thou do. Verse 21. And Balaam rose up in the morning and saddled his ass and went with the princes of Moab. And God's anger was kindled because he went. And the angel of the Lord stood in the way for an adversary against him. Now he was riding upon his ass, and his 2 servants were with him. Y'all, partial obedience is disobedience. Balaam didn't wait for the men to call him like God said. He decided he really wanted to be promoted. And so in his mind, that answer from God was a yes. So he rose up early in the morning, just like he had in verse 13. But this time he didn't fully obey. In verse 22, we see God in a light that a lot of Christians don't want to acknowledge anymore. Y'all, we give Satan too much credit for talking about, girl, Satan tried to kill me. He tried to attack me when da-da-da-da-da-da. Girl, Satan is on my trail. Hold up. No, boo. That is God standing in your way as an adversary against you. In verses 23 through 27, Balaam's donkey, in verses 23 through 27, Balaam's donkey starts tripping when he sees the angel of the Lord standing in the way that he's supposed to go. The first time he sees him, he turns aside from the way and Balaam smites him. The second time, she thrusts herself against the wall and crushes Balaam's foot, and he smites her again. The third time, she just falls down, y'all, under Balaam, and he gets so angry that he smites her again. Now in verse 28, the donkey starts talking, y'all. This is mind-blowing to me, because Balaam didn't even say, yo, hold up. Are you talking? Like, you're a donkey. Are you like really talking? He didn't even say that. He just responded to her when she asked, yo, what you doing? Why are you hitting me? Man, if it was me, I would have took off running. Well, no, I really can't say that because I did get my sister's dogs to say some human words at one time. And she told me if I kept it up, me and them dogs were going to have to go. And I'm not an animal person, so I shut up. So, anywho, the donkey basically asks in the next few verses, what's wrong with you? Why do you keep hitting me? I've been true to you all these years. Sidebar. Remember verse 22? It said that two of his servants were with him. What were they doing when all of this was going on? Were they encouraging Balaam? Talking about, yo, look at that. That's crazy, man. Glad it ain't me. Why didn't his servants ask him if he was out of the will of God? Why were his servants silent as Balaam was being disobedient? Who is allowing you to remain dysfunctional? Whoever it is, that person doesn't love you. They just love the fact that you are more dysfunctional than they are, so that you are in the light and they're not. All right, getting back to the text. So the donkey assumes that since she saw the angel of the Lord, that Balaam had to as well. But how many of you know that when you are hell bent on doing something that you shouldn't be doing, that your only focus is that thing that you shouldn't be doing? Come on, y'all. Y'all know what I'm talking about? You set up that time and that place to meet that girl from work before you go home to your wife, and you are so focused on that woman and what you shouldn't be doing that you don't even see your wife's best friend watch you walk into that hotel. Maybe you are so bent on getting that next fix. Maybe you are so bent on getting that next fix that you don't even see your children watching from the crack in the door, wondering if you're going to be okay. Balak was hell-bent on getting what Balaam had for him. Pamela was hell-bent on getting all of the things that her parents withheld from her as a child. And boy, did she get them and more. All right, so we're finally getting close to the scripture that was for this message. And I'm sorry for the detour, but I had to give you all the backstory, right? Verses 31 through 35 in the King James say, Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand. And he bowed down his head and fell flat on his face. And the angel of the Lord said unto him, Wherefore hast thou smitten thine ass these 3 times? Behold, I went out to withstand thee, because thy way is perverse before me. And the ass saw me and turned from me these 3 times. Unless she had turned from me, surely now also I had slain thee and saved her alive. Verses 31 through 33 in the Well Woman version. So that's me. That's my title. I'm the woman at the well, married multiple times, but now all I'm doing is trying to run and tell everybody about Jesus. All right. So the TWW, the Well Woman version. All right. And so verses 31 through 33 for that version would say, Then the Lord opened the eyes of Pamela, and she saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword was drawn in his hand. And she bowed her head down and fell flat on her face in her RV and rolled over on the floor, crying, snotting, repenting, bawling, screaming, and throwing up. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, I went to withstand thee, because thy way is perverse before me. Unless several interruptions had occurred, I would have slain thee. Donkey saving, number 1. Abortion at the age of 16. Now you would think that since the doctors just like scream at me whenever I'm trying to come to from anesthesia, you would think at the age of 16 I would have been knocked out, right? My way was perverse before the Lord, and it had the opposite effect on me. I woke up in the middle of my abortion, only to find the view of my fetus in what I consider a huge pickle jar in front of me, covered in blood as the fetus was floating on the side. I was naive. I truly didn't understand what was going on inside me and what was growing inside me. I don't know what I was thinking, but that visual ended up giving me nightmares for 19 years. My children would often try to wake me up from them, but I was too deep in the pit of my dreams. This is why I'm such an advocate today for adoption instead of abortion. Of course, I've repented and God has forgiven me. For my own closure, though, I went to Planned Parenthood on May 7th of this year, 37 years after my abortion. And I sat in their parking lot, cleansing my mind, my soul, and my heart. I prayed again for forgiveness, which I didn't have to do because God forgave me the first time I asked him to. But yet he's such a good father that he took me to Proverbs chapter 24 while I was sitting in the car. And I took comfort in verse 12 because he says he ponders the heart. And if I said I didn't know what I was doing, then he'll take that into consideration when it comes to rendering according to every man his worth. Donkey saving number 2. I married a man that had it going on in every way. He was dark chocolate. He was fit. He was athletic. He was a Marine. He was fun. He was younger than me. He loved his women. While away for the military on a mission, he had multiple affairs. And affairs for me automatically mean divorce. I already had no self-esteem. So to step outside of the marriage to get what I obviously must not be giving you messed with me mentally. This time was no different. When I found out about his multiple affairs, I got physically sick and started throwing up all over the place. That physical sickness turned into mental sickness and exhaustion. And that turned into depression, which turned into plans to commit suicide. In February 2003, I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and my youngest sister, Wynette, was stationed 45 minutes up the road at Cherry Point, North Carolina. Growing up, we were oil and water, so much so that our parents made us sleep in the same bed until I left to join the Marine Corps. They wanted to teach us to love one another. Unfortunately, that love didn't take place until I learned to love myself. Ring, ring. Hey, Nat. Hey, Pam. I'm tired, Nat. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to commit suicide. And I just wanted you to know where everything's going to be. The boys are going to be okay because they live with Rick and LaShawn now. They'll get my life insurance policy, which you know the Marine Corps gives us $400,000 when we pass away. Okay, Pam, just do me this one favor. You always talk about God. Just go to church one last time. If God don't speak to you, go ahead with your plan. You done already told me where I can find everything I need. Y'all remember I said I was known for getting a prayer through, but I couldn't get one through for myself. Now, I agree with my sister's request, but listen, y'all, don't tell that to nobody. If somebody is trying to commit suicide or thinking about committing suicide, get them help immediately, okay? All right, so getting back to the sermon, the testimony, the teachimony. The next day was Sunday, and I walked into church as usual. But y'all know, if church would have walked in with me, suicide wouldn't have even been a thought. So I walk into church, and it's as if God said, Pam, this day is for you. The greeters were welcoming, friendly, and attentive. During worship, the co-pastor sang a song I'd never heard before called I Almost Let Go. Are you serious? Had my sister called her and told her I was suicidal? Of course not. God probably did, though. I was a mess. You think I cut up in church this past Sunday? That's nothing compared to the brokenness that I had overtake me with that song because I was ready to let go. Then the pastor gets up and he preaches his message, and I can't tell you the title of it. I've got that message on CD in my storage stuff, but I can tell you that I began crawling to the altar because I was already so broken from the song I almost let go that with this preaching on top of it, I got on my hands and my knees. I was wearing a black dress that came to my knees, black stockings, and I don't remember anything except crawling. And I heard 3 words from the co-pastor: leave her alone. Donkey saving number 3. Getting choked by my pastor husband. Having been married more times than I should, more times than my family probably wanted me to, more times than my children ever cared to admit to, I was set out to marry again, each time being the last time. But how many of you all know that forever can't be the mindset of only one person in the marriage? But this time I decided to ask God if I should marry this man. And God replied with just one word: Abraham. I knew enough about the Bible to know that Isaac was the promised child. Oh, yes, let's go ahead, do this. God said yes. Just like Balaam in verse 21, I got my answer and I ran with it. I hadn't known the guy long at all. As a matter of fact, I'd never met him in person. He was someone I met on a dating site, which is, was, and will ever be contrary to who I am. But I was seeking love in ways that I had not before, hoping to find love that I had not before. We married. He moved to California with me. We started a church. I funded it because he wasn't working just yet. And on Sunday, he would preach the word. And on Monday through Saturday, he would hit me and drag me around the house and call me names and abuse me. And then again on Sunday, he would preach the word. And after months of this, I couldn't do it anymore. Another failed relationship or not, I was out. And I went up to the loft to prepare the paperwork, to turn over all the documents and the funds for the church. And I called him up to the loft to explain everything. And moments later, as I look up towards the ceiling, his body was positioned over me. Both hands were squeezing my neck. And I couldn't muster up the breath to say anything but the blood of Jesus, the blood of Jesus, the blood of Jesus. And on that third time, his hands miraculously loosed from my neck. I would later learn that that miracle was due to the fact that God told my sister Tina to start praying for me immediately. She had no clue why. That violent throwing down to the ground and choking me led to me bleeding out of my nose and mouth for an hour and 40 minutes several days later. The doctors had no idea how to stop the bleeding, so they took liquid cocaine and shoved it up my nose and told me that I may never be completely healed. To this day, I still have to monitor when I get a nosebleed. I've only had one major one since that time, but when you start I've only had one major one since that time, but when you start to drink your own blood from your nose, panic can set in quickly. I went out to withstand thee, because thy way is perverse before me. You see, just like Balak, who was known for being able to bless and to curse according to the gift given to him by God, even though his eyes were not open to the things of God. I too was able to get a prayer through because of the gift of God given to me. But I wasn't seeking God's face. I was just walking in his grace and taking it for granted. What people didn't see or know was what was going on behind closed doors. I was reading smut to take my mind off of not having a man. I thought that as long as I was reading about these sexual things and wasn't doing them, that I wasn't sinning. Y'all know I was lusting, and lust is a sin. What people didn't know was that I entertained the Ouija board when I was younger. I tried seances several times. I used to believe whatever my Aries Pisces horoscope said. I used to dress up as a witch for Halloween. I used to sleep around unprotected. Thank you, Lord, that I have no diseases. I used to get so angry that I would black out and not know what I did, who I did it to, what I said, or who felt the effects of my wrath. I used to hurt people because hurt people hurt people. What people didn't know was that I used to marry each and every time because I thought being married was better than continuing to fornicate, regardless of what marriage number I was on. What people did not know is that I didn't like myself. It took me until February of 2005 before I looked in the mirror and said I was pretty. And that was only a result of God asking me while I was in a mall one day to look around and see if anybody was satisfied with the way he had created them. That question caused me to stop wearing makeup, stop getting acrylic nails. It caused me to learn to love myself on the inside so that I would be beautiful on the outside as well. It was a struggle. People didn't know that place of anger from which I was operating was because I didn't think my parents loved me, or anyone else for that matter. People did not know I could get a prayer through for them, but I was clueless when it came to praying for myself. People didn't know that I was homeless, sleeping at a rest stop on the I-5 highway as a gunnery sergeant of Marines because my military spouse husband was entitled to our home during the domestic violence time frame, even though he was the perpetrator. People didn't know that that's why I purchased my RV and lived in it for almost 3 years, because I said I would never be homeless again. People didn't know I would spend almost 4 decades chasing a love that didn't love me. Oh yeah, I could get some prayers through, but I had no personal relationship with my Lord and Savior like I do now. Verses 34 through 35. And Balaam said unto the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I knew not that thou stoodest in the way against me. Now therefore, if it displease thee, I will get me back again. And the angel of the Lord said unto Balaam, Go with the men, but only the word that I shall speak unto thee, that thou shalt speak. So Balaam went with the princes of Balak. He's a God of another chance, y'all. He's a God of another chance. Now, in the remainder of the verses in the chapter, although Balaam wants curses pronounced on the Now, in the remainder of the verses in the chapter, although Balak wants curses pronounced on the Israelites, Balaam blesses them 3 times. Chapter 24, verses 1 through 4, in the King James read as follows. And Balaam saw that it pleased, in chapter 24, verses 1 through 4 in the King James Version reads as follows. And when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he went not as at other times to seek for enchantments, but he set his face towards the wilderness. And Balaam lifted up his eyes and saw Israel abiding in his tents according to their tribes. And the Spirit of God came upon him. And he took up his parable and said, Balaam, the son of Beor, hath said, and the man whose eyes are open hath said. He hath said, which has heard the words of God, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open. Let's go ahead to that TWW version, right? And read verses 1 through 4 again. TWW version. And when Pamela saw that it pleased the Lord to share her testimony in hopes of helping others to overcome, she did not as at other times, but set her face towards the wilderness of the Mojave Desert in 29 Palms, California. Pamela lifted up her eyes, and the Spirit of God came upon her. And she took up a parable and said, Pamela, the daughter of Willie, has said, a woman whose eyes are open has said. She had said, which heard the words of God, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having eyes wide open. As a result of this, my life is now dedicated to God. I committed myself to God wholeheartedly several years ago. I denounced Satan and all of his works and the things that I had done for him. And I've since been on several what could be called missionary journeys. My first one was against my will, y'all. It was going to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to sit as one of the court reporters for the trials for the terrorists from 9/11. I didn't want to do it because I felt that was the best place for another attack. And I prayed to God that I would not have to go. But he told me to go and to take a copy of his word with me and leave it there. And he told me not to call what he has cleansed common, meaning there would be people from all nations there because of the interpreters that were needed for these trials. Therefore, I took a copy of the Message Bible and left it in the Cusco when I departed, because we never returned to the same Cusco again. And this way, a person that was an interpreter from a foreign nation could pick up God's word and be able to read it without all of the these, thous, and thuses, right? So my second missionary trip was termed what was called a triangle tour. And after experiencing another church hurt, which never gets easy, I joined a place called Joshua Springs Calvary Chapel. And it taught me how to read the Bible book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. I also attended its Bible college just for the knowledge for about 2 years and learned how to study God's word. During my time there, I went with them up north to Idaho and to Utah to help with church plants. One of the locations was still experiencing segregation of the whites and the Hispanics. And our outreach in the park united the two, if only but for a couple of days. My third missionary trip was to Kenya, Nairobi, Africa. And it was on the way there that I was able to stop and see Noah's Ark in the Netherlands. This missionary trip humbled me, and it changed my way of thinking. I was never materialistic to begin with, but this took away whatever desire I had to continue gaining things in my personal life. While on this mission, I would visit Kibera, the largest slum in Kenya, and I would hear the testimony of a woman who almost died because of the politics. I would visit Kamiti maximum security prison with the team so that we could provide them with toilet paper, flip-flops, toothpaste, etc. Church service was so packed there that the children went outside to play. These were their toys. And you see one of the deacons, the elders, helping fix a toy. My next missionary trip was 3 years ago when I turned 50. I worked at a place where I had 14 weeks of vacation. And so during that time, I decided I was going to visit all 50 states at the age of 50 and leave a Bible in each state. I had no pre-planned destinations of drop-off points. I asked God to lead me every step of the way. Within 8 months, I had gone to all 50 states and placed the Bible anonymously in each one, with the exception of the California Bible. I gave that to a 16-year-old man sitting next to me on the train who was heading to California to turn himself into the authorities to serve a prison sentence. Even with that, I sought the Lord regarding whether to give it to him or actually leave it somewhere in California. The answer by God was nothing short of incredible. You can ask me later for the details if you want them. So, ending this portion of my testimony, I wanted to give you a little more insight as to how I ended up back here in Cleveland and why I'm headed to South Carolina. In 2019, I was on my last missionary journey in Lima, Peru. The day before, I was scheduled to depart to come back to America. I left before everyone else. I believe I heard God calling me and telling me to follow him to Peru. And I asked for people to pray for me so that I wouldn't be out of God's will. And upon returning from Peru, my oldest son let me know that he was going to be preaching and that I could log in and listen if I wanted to. And in his sermon, he mentioned the rich young ruler and Jesus telling him to sell what he had, give to the poor, and follow him. Those were the words I had just heard days earlier. Was my son confirming God's words? After a few hours after he preached, I called him and asked him if he told me to listen to him for a specific reason. And he said no, and he asked me why. And he said, I believe you said something in your message that God told me to do. And he said, what? And I said, when you were talking about the rich young ruler, and my son didn't even let me finish. He cut me off and he said, Mom, I did not want that in my message. He said, for both services, I was going to take it out, and God told me to leave it there. He said, so as much as I love you, you need to sell what you have and follow him. I immediately put in my notice at work and told them that I was walking away at the end of the academic year. I didn't walk away immediately because when I moved to Wisconsin, I asked God how long I was going to be there, and his response was like a prison sentence. He was like 3 to 5 years. So since I hadn't been there 3 years yet, I wanted to make sure that I made that 3-year timeline, which took me to the end of the academic year in May 2020. Yes, May 2020 ended up being in the middle of the pandemic. When I walked away, I was making in excess of $100,000 a year with only an associate's degree. My job was teaching the profession of stenographic court reporting. I worked from 8 to 2, Monday through Thursday, and had 14 weeks of vacation per year. I was living the dream. Yet it wasn't God's dream. I've currently had 38 addresses on record with the post office, only 2 of which were between birth and 18. When I moved to South Carolina, we'll be talking about number 39. I've had more marriages than a woman at the well. I've had 6 pregnancies, which resulted in 1 abortion, 2 sons, and 3 miscarriages. I've owned 14 cars. I've owned 4 houses and a condominium. I've had several last names because at one point I was so lost, I even went and legally took my middle name and made it my last name and had no middle name. Y'all, sin will have you messing up your life and everybody's lives around it. As of May 2020, or as May 2020 approached and things were shutting down, I still purchased my plane ticket to Peru, and the airlines canceled it. As May 2020 approached and things were shutting down, I still purchased a plane ticket to Peru, even though the airlines would end up canceling it. I still quit my job. I gave away everything I had, including my car. I traveled across the country to see my family before finally going to Shreveport, Louisiana to wait out the opening of the Peruvian borders. That was the second time that I lived in Shreveport. And once they opened the borders, the pastor that I was serving under, who was the father-in-law to the one I was going to serve under in Peru, told me now is not the time to go. Therefore, I came to Cleveland because I'd heard God say that Cleveland was going to be my next step. I arrived here on Christmas Eve last year. I didn't know what God had in store for me. Since I had dreams of opening a coffee shop, I started preparing my own home for a coffee shop until I could get one elsewhere. I purchased my home here and diligently began transforming my living room and dining room into a place of the ever-presence of God. I called it Prodigals because that's another name that I give myself. In early May, God halted everything. He told me to quit putting money into the home and stop decorating it. And I was confused. I was preparing a sanctuary for those that needed to get away and to get into His presence. And it wouldn't be until May 14th that I would learn why God put a halt on everything. It would be because of my cancer diagnosis. The tumor took up over half of the size of my left kidney, and that kidney would have to be completely removed. With each visit to the hospital, they were concerned about the cancer spreading in more areas of my body. The liver, the lungs, the colon were added to the list of places it could have spread. Because of the unknown, they cut me open from on my chest, from my breast to below my belly. They were able to peel the kidney off of the colon and not have to resection the colon. A week and a half after surgery, I ended up in the emergency room, only to learn that the cancer had spread to both lungs, and that was incurable. A week after that, I learned that the cancer had spread to a spot in my brain, and I was given 5 doses of radiation at one time, and I didn't feel any immediate effects. However, the schedule to taper me off of the steroids so that I could start the treatment on my lungs was so aggressive that it caused me to end up in the emergency room at Cleveland Clinic for 50 hours awaiting a bed at the main campus so I could see a neurologist because of the bleeding on the brain. I wasn't able to formulate sentences. I wasn't able to pray. My right arm lost all ability to do anything. The left side of my face started drooping. A week or so after that, I had a mammogram and the doctor called me and said, hey, we're picking up something that we don't like that's concerning us in your left breast. Therefore, yesterday, I went for more imaging to determine if I have breast cancer, if the kidney cancer has metastasized to the breast, or if it's nothing at all. Through all of this, I can say I love God more today than I ever have in my life. And because of that, I made a vow to remain a single woman the rest of my life, that I may focus my attention on the things of God. Next week, I'm heading to South Carolina to help start a church with my oldest son called Vibes. We're also opening Vibes Coffee House. Only God can do exceeding abundantly above what you can think or ask. I actually get to have the coffee house that I wanted without having to worry about the business aspect of it. So I hope you all were encouraged by my testimonies. I hope you understand that you too can overcome no matter what the situation is. I hope that you know that God has nothing but plans to prosper you and not to harm you. But you can't keep walking in God's grace and His gift and His calling without getting into His presence on a regular basis. You've got to get to know Him. You've got to learn His idiosyncrasies. You've got to spend time with Him daily. It's not easy, but it's so worth it.